Get ready.
William Joyner.
There will be terrible times in the last days. Take note of this. There will be terrible times in the last days. Now, the last days is a biblical term for the time period that spans the interval between Christ's first coming, when he came, born as a baby in Bethlehem, and his second coming. Jesus will come again. The Jesus who was born as a baby, grew up, lived as a man, was crucified, buried, rose again, ascended into heaven. But one day he will return, and we are still waiting for his return, 2,000 years on. But the last days is that period between his first coming and his return, his second coming. So we are now presently in the last days. We live in the last days. Paul, as he writes to Timothy, they were living in the last days. We too are living in the last days. The last days are the time in which God's gift of salvation in Jesus Christ is offered to the world, to all the peoples, all the nations, all the tribes and all the tongues of this world, that they might turn and find forgiveness in Jesus Christ. They might repent of their sin and put their trust in him. These are the last days in which Jesus Christ is offered to the world, just as we've been singing. The Bible warns that one day the last days will come to an end. There will be the last day of the last days. The last day. The Bible speaks of that as the day of the Lord, the day when the Lord returns, the day of final judgment, the day when eternal destinies are confirmed. But before and until Christ comes, we're living in these last days. And Paul says, mark this, there will be terrible times in the last days. It's not that everything will be terrible in the last days, but there will be terrible times. There will be hard and difficult times. And in the verses that follow, Paul warns us about three things. Firstly, Paul says, beware people without true love. Beware of people without true love. Looking at verses 2 to 4. In verses 2 and 4, Paul provides a long list of what will cause terrible times in the last days. And you'll notice straight away that the list that Paul gives is not a list of future catastrophic events, but rather it's an appalling catalogue of repulsive personal characteristics, 18 of them in total. Paul doesn't tell us what will happen in the last days. Instead, he tells us what people will be like. And it's because people are like this that there will be terrible times. Paul says people will be, firstly, lovers of themselves, people who are wrapped up in themselves, only concerned about their own interests, people who are self-conscious, people who are self-centered, people who are self-indulgent, people who are in love with themselves, lovers of themselves, lovers of money. People will actively pursue material wealth and gain, employing their best efforts to increase their wealth. Boastful. People will brag about their accomplishments. They will trumpet their successes and hide their failures. They will be boastful. They will be proud, arrogant, looking down upon others. They will be abusive. This word abusive, it's not to be thought of as much in a physical sense as in a verbal sense. People will speak ill of others. People will be abusive. They will be spurting out words that are like darts with poison tips that will cause injury, hurt and harm to others. Boastful, proud, abusive, disobedient to their parents. People will have no regard for authority within the family. They will be disrespectful. They will be rebellious, ungrateful. People will not be thankful for the things that they have received from others. They will have little appreciation of what others have done for them. Unholy. People will be irreligious. They will have no sense of the sacred or the divine. They will be without love, heartless, callous, unaffectionate, unsympathetic, unloving, unforgiving, merciless and hostile towards others. They will refuse to compromise or to be reconciled. Unforgiving, slanderous. In Greek, the word is literally diabolical, like the devil. What is the devil like? Well, he tells lies. He's deceitful. He's scheming. People People will hurl accusations against others like verbal grenades, slanderous, without self-control. People will be uninhibited, unrestrained in the way in which they live. They will live undisciplined lives. There will be few boundaries or few limits to what they will do. Brutal. People who are vicious, savage, like a wild animal. Like a wild animal that you should keep your distance from in case it turns upon you. People will be brutal. People will be not lovers of the good. They will hate what is right. They will despise what is good. They will lack true moral judgment. They will be treacherous, willing to betray others, not worthy of trust. They will be rash, reckless, plunge ahead without any thought of danger or the consequences of their speech or their actions. Conceited. People will be big-headed and self-important. And people will be lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God. People who are driven by self-gratification. People who are living for pleasure. Their aim is not to please God, but rather to please themselves. 18 personal characteristics. And that long list of Paul's can be summarized by the opening and closing phrases. At the head and at the tail of the list, the words begin with the Greek word philo, which means love. And so in summary, Paul warns that there will be terrible times in the last days because people will be lovers of themselves and lovers of money and lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God. So we must be careful what we love. You know, often we think that sin arises from hatred and evil. But you know, ultimately all sin arises from love. All sin results from love. A love that is misdirected, or a love that is deficient, or a love that is selfish, or a love that is excessive. Essentially, we sin when we love other things, or when we love ourselves more than we love God, or more than we love others. And in these verses, in verses 2 to 4, Paul is describing the rotten fruit when a love is directed inwards, when a love is directed towards ourselves, when our love is selfish, when we are primarily lovers of ourselves, but also when we love material or physical things more than we love God, when we love money or when we love pleasure more than we love God. And so this list describes what people are like when their love is not directed towards God or towards others for their good. This list is what happens when people live for themselves with no thought or little concern for God, when people think and act as if they are at the center of the universe and the whole world revolves around them. And it's not an attractive picture that Paul paints. It's a catalogue of human depravity. And you know, it's very easy for us to read a list like this, or to listen to a list like this and to think of other people. But these verses act as a mirror. They act as a mirror that presents us with a clear and true reflection of ourselves. Because if you haven't realized it already, this list describes you and me in our fallen human condition. This is the ugly face of sin. This is the result of hearts that are rebellious, hearts that are corrupted.